Hey everyone, this is Baphometrix, and in this video I'm going to show you all about how Bitwig does bouncing of tracks or freezing of tracks. And specifically I'm going to talk about it in comparison with Ableton uh, and the way that Ableton does freezing and flattening. They're very similar in concept, they're different in execution, and I think Bitwig has some really interesting advantages over Ableton in this regard. So what you're looking at here is a project of mine that I'm currently working on. I work in phases, kind of according to the Ill-Gates methodology. So the basic idea is I start with super looping, which is kind of testing out ideas in usually an 8-bar loop or 16-bar loop. And then after I've tried a bunch of sounds and found things that work together, different combinations that work together, I then create an arrangement like you see here in a phase 2. So right here, I'm at the end of phase 2 and I have a basic arrangement, kind of a starting point for my final detailing and then mixing and mastering. That's what we call phase 3. And there's a certain amount of automation on some of these tracks, and a lot of the tracks are still in MIDI, like this entire set of tracks from here through here is mostly MIDI. I've got one little audio track here that I'm using for a drum turnaround, but the rest of these tracks that you see here, most of them are MIDI. And what I want to do now as I move into phase 3 is flatten most of these to audio because I've done my tweaking. I'm not going to make these synth sounds any different. I'm ready to just flatten most things to audio or everything to audio and then start doing lots of audio chopping and interjections and reversals and other tricks we do with audio, creative warping, all kinds of stuff. So this is a starting point for a song. And on some of the tracks, there's minimal automation. I'll just show you briefly how Bitwig does things here. I made liberal use of what they call an instrument selector. These are actually different synthesizers, different instances of a synth called VPS Avenger that are in a special kind of chain, and I can use automation to toggle between the different synths inside of one track on the fly. And so what that allows me to do is instead of having 5 different tracks stacked on top of each other, which gets really messy, I can keep all my synths of a very similar kind of sound or different variations of a synth in one track. And then when I flatten to audio, it just flattens it all to audio on that one track. So you'll see that in a second. This track doesn't have too much going on, but this one here has a little more going on. You can see I have some volume automation that I'm doing with just a little rack I built for doing either fade or bipolar automation. You can see it also has a instrument rack in it that's flipping it on this automation lane here. I'm using one sound for this clip, but I'm using other sounds for the remaining clips, a different synth. And I've also got this FX selector that I want to keep around. Right now, I'm not doing any actual automation on it or jumping between the different instances of the this particular effects, but later during detailing, I'm going to do a lot more jumping around between these different types of gates. This is like some gating effects, and they're all different patterns, and I'm going to do some automation to jump around between them. So, you know, all these tracks are full of automation like this, and there's some things I want to keep, like I want to keep all of the any kind of volume automation or effects automation. I want to keep that, but I want to get rid of the synths. I want to flatten the synth sounds to audio and get rid of this entire set of synths. The reason I want to do that is because the entire track, or rather the entire project, is currently taking about 1 minute and 20 seconds to load. And it's not like I have a problem with CPU, as you'll see in a minute when I play this. I've got plenty of headroom in my CPU, but it's just, you know, it's annoying when you load up a project that's very far along, and it takes a minute and a half, 2 minutes, 3 minutes to load just because of all the VSTs it's trying to load up in memory and index and stuff. And Ableton's the same way. I mean, Ableton and Bitwig are about the same in their loading speed. Bitwig is faster in some respects, but not that much faster. So I just want to be able to open up this project and have it load a lot faster and not be dealing with a whole bunch of VSTs I don't care about anymore. So that's why I'm partly why I'm doing this flattening to audio, is not just to allow me to chop up audio and play games with my audio clips, but also to speed up the project load. So before I go any further, let's let you hear this track real quick so that you can hear a before and after and, you know, see that it's all working the same. So here it is from start to finish.
Baphometrix. My name is Baphometrix. I bring you the message. What you say to that? Yeah, you say yes, mistress. Don't need no whips, no. Don't need no chain, no. I make that sound that get into your brain. My name is Baphometrix. I bring you the message. Baphometrix. I bring you the message. Don't need no whips, no. Don't need no chain, no. I'll make that sound that get into your brain. Baphometrix. No. Baphometrix. No. My name is Baphometrix. I bring you the message. Baphometrix. I bring you the message. My name is. My name is. My name is. My name is.
Okay, so a couple things to note about this before I continue. I don't do a whole lot of processing any more than I have to during phase 2 while I'm setting up my initial arrangement. I don't do any more processing than I need to. I save most of the heavy processing for phase 3 when everything's been flattened to audio. And that's because, you know, in early stages where you're testing sounds and building up your arrangement, you tend to use a lot of MIDI VSTs. They tend to take a lot of CPU overhead. And so you don't want to also be loading up the project with tons and tons of, you know, heavy EQ processing and compressors and all kinds of saturators and things like that. It's easier to save a lot of your mix-oriented processing and your fine-tuning type processing for a stage when most things have been flattened to audio. So, you know, as you notice, this sounds very digital and clean, a lot of these sounds. So that's one thing to notice. This is going to get a lot dirtier and more analog sounding once I'm done with it in phase 3. Also, the vocals have some fairly heavy-handed processing on them right now, especially for a rack that we call, a sit on top rack, which has some fairly intense things happening with stereo delays and stereo parallel compression. I don't really want to get too much into this, so just be aware that the vocals are also kind of in an early state, and I'm being very heavy-handed with this particular effect. So if it sounded to you like the vocals were a little odd, that's why. I don't care, because I'm going to be leaving this. This is already audio, and I'm going to be fine-tuning a lot of this automation and processing later, once the whole mix is built up and sounding a little richer and fatter and more analog. Okay, so let's get to the meat of it, which is the actual bouncing. So I'll demonstrate on this track here what bouncing kind of looks like. And I'm going to show you, because it has a combination of an instrument selector with 3 different VST synthesizers in it, followed by some standard, a standard kind of audio rack that's just doing volume automation, and followed by an FX selector that's running a few different type of gating effects. And I want to keep this, and I want to keep this, and I want to keep the automation that I've already set up for like the volume automation here in this lane. But I want to flatten this to audio and get rid of the synths. So in Ableton, let's talk about Ableton first and how that works. In Ableton, you basically freeze and flatten and bounce to audio or flatten to audio by selecting the track, right-clicking the track, and from the menu you pick an option like freeze. And what that does is it quickly reads through the track and kind of turns it gray and adds a big kind of ugly blue clip on top of it that's an audio clip. And it keeps the underlying MIDI clips, it keeps them, they're hidden under that audio clip. And it also grays out all the devices that were on the track, because it basically says, I'm going to process this track with all of its audio processing. I'm going to flatten it to one bounced audio file. And I'm going to keep everything under the covers, but I'm just going to kind of replace it with this audio file for as long as it's frozen. And then there's a nice advantage to that, in that if you decide later you want to unfreeze the audio and change some of the original MIDI or change some of the original processing, you can do that, and then you can refreeze it. So you haven't lost the original devices and processing. You can just freeze, unfreeze, freeze, unfreeze, and that's really nice, right? A Bitwig doesn't work like that. Bitwig works a little differently. And the last thing, before I talk about Bitwig, the last thing I want to say about Ableton is, at any point, you can finally decide to commit that track completely to audio by flattening it. So Ableton also has a flatten option in its context menu for a track. So the basic idea is you might freeze while you're still not sure you want to get rid of all the MIDI and processing. But later, when you want to commit, you just right-click the same frozen track and say flatten, and then it just basically wipes out all the processing devices, all the synth devices, the MIDI devices. It just gets rid of them all and just turns it into a straight, plain audio track. So it's very workable. Lots of people like that. But it has a tendency to make you not ever really want to commit fully to audio, because you go, dang, what if that processing isn't quite right? You know, because as you work on your mix and you keep building it up and you keep detailing it, you keep adding processing, and then you crush it into a mastering chain, you know, things are constantly changing, and there's always this hesitation, like, what if I want to go back and adjust something that isn't sounding really good anymore now that I've pushed this into a mastering chain and cranked it way up to a high loudness target to be competitive on SoundCloud and Beatport and things like that. You know, what if I want to go change something? So we always have this tendency in Ableton to, like, I don't want to commit, I don't want to commit, I don't want to commit until I pretty much have to. And that keeps your projects large and bloated and take a long time to load. and you suffer under that for a lot of your project lifespan, right? Okay, so Bitwig does a few things that make that pain less and make the decision to flatten to audio a lot easier and a lot sooner. So that's what I'm about to demonstrate. Okay, so the way Bitwig works is it doesn't freeze and flatten. Instead, and it doesn't do anything at the track level, right? If I right click on this track, I don't see any options here to do anything like freeze or bounce or flatten or anything like that. The way Bitwig works is it works on the individual clip, like this one clip right here, or on a span of selected time, like this span of selected time right here. And right now I've got a chunk of time selected, so I have this little time menu. And you see you have this option to bounce in place or bounce. And then if I can also just right click on the selected time and see the same options to bounce in place or bounce. And then if I'm not selecting a whole segment of time, but instead I just have one clip selected, I can right click on that clip, and I also have a bounce in place and bounce option, or I can use the context sensitive menus up here and get to the same bounce in place and bounce. So what is the difference between bounce in place and bounce? The basic idea is this. If I bounce a clip, like this one little clip right here, I've got it selected, and I'm going to right click it and do bounce. It basically gives me a few options like, well, what bit depth do you want to bounce it post track fader or pre-track fader? Do you want to bounce it without any of the FX that might be on the track and have a clean bounce only of the synthesizer output over here where I'm wiggling my mouse? It gives you some options. In this case, let's say I just want to take a post fader so it's at the same volume it is right now. And you almost always want to bounce to 24-bit. There isn't that much value in bouncing to 32-bit. It just makes your bounce files a lot bigger. Yes, all internal processing is 32-bit in Bitwig, just like it is in Ableton, but a 24-bit bounce is usually the best option. And you usually don't want to dither on internal track bounces. Okay, so I'm going to pick post fader 24-bit, and actually you might choose, depending on how you like to mix and how if I select pre-fader, it's going to be a lot louder because it's going to ignore, over here where I'm wiggling my mouse, it's going to ignore the position of the fader. In some cases you might want to do that, but in this case I'm just going to do post fader for all these bounces. Pre-fader would be closer to a normalized bounce. In other programs, you can choose to normalize when you bounce. All right, so I'm going to bounce it, and it temporarily turns off the audio engine, renders the bounce out on a new track right below it. It's a new audio track, and here's our bounce. The original track is completely untouched. Okay, so this is one type of bounce you could do. And early in a project, you might choose to do this type of bounce and then simply pick the original MIDI track and deactivate it. So you can activate or deactivate tracks. And there's a neat trick in Bitwig. I'm going to use a shortcut key for it. It's just like Ableton. I use my 0 key. Okay. I deactivated the track and it just disappeared. Hey, wait a minute, where did it go? Did I delete it? What happens? Well, it turns out Bitwig has a really friendly feature where you can automatically hide all of your deactivated tracks. So here's the track I just deactivated, and you can just get it out of your way and not have to look at it. But it's still there, and if I decided later I wanted to come back and do something on the original MIDI, I could simply find it again, reactivate it, and now it's back. And I could, delete the bounce track and come back here and adjust whatever MIDI I have, make whatever changes I want to do and just rebounce it. Okay, so that's the regular bounce. You can bounce several clips at a time. Like I will multi-select these 3 clips. And there's a lot of different ways you can multi-select. The easiest is actually use your little crosshair and just drag across the clips. Okay, now if I bounce these, it's just going to create all 3 clips. Okay, and then another way you can bounce, let's just delete those, is by selecting time. This time I'll do these 3 clips with time. So here I'm going to bounce the time span instead of individual clips. And this time when I bounce, I will also do pre-fader to show you that the waveforms are a little bit louder in this type of bounce. Now what you'll notice right away is that it's making it look more like a stem, and it's ringing out the tail of this clip, and it's chopping off the tail of this clip, right? So this is why sometimes you want to bounce time and not individual clips, because there may be tails on some of these clips, right? Here it's cut off. If I go to the bounce and try to drag it out a little bit, you'll see it's a hard stop, okay? But this clearly had a little bit of a tail on it right here. So let's try that bounce again. And this time, let's take another 4 bars past the edge of the last clip in the bounce. And let's bounce it one more time. Do it pre-fader again. So these are all the differences between, selecting an individual clip to bounce or selecting a chunk of time to bounce, and so on. And as it turns out in this case, there is no tail. And part of the reason there's no tail is I probably have some volume automation cutting that short. No volume automation. So there's just no tail on that particular clip. But, if you're not sure, you can always just grab a little time beyond the edge of the clip and see what happens when you bounce it. As you can see, it's very easy to just, test bounces, delete the bounce tracks, and so on. Okay, so that's a regular bounce. Now, I'm not going to do that for this next move that I'm doing from phase 2 into phase 3. I'm also not going to do it in this, this version of my project. I'm going to save at this point and make a new version real quick. It'll go fast. Let's see. So the reason I'm not saving it is if I hover over this, you can see that I've named it MIDI _ at the very end of the file name in the upper left. Another way to look at it is, here's my project folder, and I've been through a few different iterations, but now I'm at the point where I want to move into phase 3 and flatten most things to audio. So what I usually do right at that point is I put a little _ MIDI at the end of the project name so that I always know if I want to go back and grab some of those original MIDI tracks again, I can always open up this project and get the MIDI tracks out of it. This is the last place I had MIDI. So I'm going to just do a quick save as and give it a new name that indicates I'm moving it into phase 3. The way that I do that is I just use a naming convention of demo versus detail. Everything that says demo is early phase 2, testing, arrangement, super looping, that kind of thing. And once I start in on detail versions, that means I'm working mostly in audio. The arrangement's pretty much set, and now I'm focused on processing and mixing. Okay, so just going to make a new save of this, and I'm going to do my flattening in this first version of the detail project. Okay, so now I'm looking at the detail version. So now I'm ready to flatten. So let's start with, let's just start and go track by track here. So there's no automation I care about saving here. Everything is just, one instrument selector rack with 2 different synths in it. So I don't care about saving anything that's on here. So when I bounce this track, I'm going to do a regular bounce and then just get rid of the original MIDI track entirely. I just won't need it anymore. So the first thing I'm going to do is they're all the same clip. They're all running the same synth. I'm going to double check and make sure I don't have any tail on that sound. So I'm grabbing a section of time and I'm doing a bounce to a new track. Let's do it post fader. And I'm just making sure there's no tail. And sure enough, if I zoom in here a little bit, take a close look, we can see it cuts off nice and short. Make it bigger, right? So there's no tail on this track. So let's just get rid of the bounce track. And what I'm going to do for this, it's the easiest way would just to be to multi-select these 3 clips and then do another bounce to just an entirely new, well, see, I don't want to have to recolor things and do all that other stuff. So I'm really just going to do bounce in place. I'll show you what bounce in place looks like now. Now, bounce in place, the basic idea behind bounce in place is that it turns everything into, it turns your MIDI into audio, but it creates this thing they call a hybrid track. If you look at these symbols here on the track names, this little waveform symbol means it's an audio track, and this is just an audio clip. I zoom in real quick, you can see it's audio, right? And if I do this track and we look at one of these things, you can see that it's MIDI. Okay, there's just one MIDI note in this one, or I can collapse it like a drum machine type of view. So this little piano thing means MIDI. But this thing here looks like a cross between a waveform and a piano, right? It's half waveform, half piano right here. And this means it's what Bitwig calls a hybrid track. And you could literally have on one track an audio clip followed by a MIDI clip, followed by audio clips, followed by a MIDI clip. And whenever it encountered the MIDI clip, any kind of MIDI devices that were on the track would be triggered. And whenever it was playing an audio clip, it would just ignore the MIDI devices on here. So I suppose I should back up. Let me do an undo. And let me show you what happens when you play MIDI in Bitwig. So let's just play this one clip here. Oops, make sure I'm on the clip. Now what I want you to look at are these yellow dots that appear right up here. The yellow dots are the indicators that MIDI is being played. Some sort of MIDI clip is being fed into the device chain down here. Okay, so we've got MIDI indicators here, and you can also see that the audio coming out of the synth is appearing here down at the bottom right. All right, so when I convert this to a hybrid track, so let's go back, turn this into a hybrid track again. I'm going to select all these, do bounce in place one more time. It's running through, it's changing those MIDI clips. It's actually truly overwriting the MIDI clips and replacing them with audio clips. But it's leaving the MIDI devices in place in case I decide I want to come in here and add a new clip that's MIDI and test some new like MIDI notes out before I decide to flatten it or whatever. Okay, this may seem odd if you're coming from Ableton, but it's actually pretty cool and pretty flexible. But now watch what happens when I play this one clip again. See how it starts with an audio indicator at the very beginning of the track? It says I'm playing audio and I'm pushing audio through all the devices here, and it's simply ignoring the MIDI instrument because there isn't a yellow indicator indicating that there's any MIDI being fed into this device chain. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Now, since I've converted these clips to audio, and I've decided there is no automation or any other kind of stuff on this track I care about keeping that's related to the MIDI, now I can safely just delete this MIDI device, and now it's just a straight audio track, even though it still says it's hybrid here, okay?
My name is...
Okay, and just as a matter of cleanup, I could leave it as a hybrid track, but there is a way to convert it to a audio track. At least I thought there was. I'm gonna have to figure out what's going on with that. Maybe I have to select all the time. Let's see. Yeah, something about this is not letting me convert it to a hybrid track, a pure audio track, but I'll figure that out later. Sorry about that. It's probably I may have to save the project or do something like that, or close and reopen Bitwig. Let's find out. I'm going to save this right now. Let's see if it'll let me convert it now. No, that's interesting. I don't know what's going on there. Maybe it's because it's in a folder. No, that's interesting. I don't know what's going on with that. Either way, it doesn't matter, because for all intents and purposes, a hybrid track will act just like an audio track too. It's just a matter of what kind of clips can you put on it. It's probably something I haven't read about doing that. So let's move on to the next track and get that flattened out. Now this one, with some of my sequences in it, I have some automation I want to keep. I want to keep the volume automation. And I want to keep the FX Selector automation track and this whole FX Selector piece. All I want to do, though, is flatten out the MIDI to audio. So when I select these clips and do a bounce in place, okay. Again, I may have done that prematurely. If I was really being careful, I would check to see that there aren't any tails ringing out on any of these. I know that I don't want tails in these in this event. But just to be good for y'all, let's double check that. Let's do it the way we should do that. So I'm gonna undo, and let's just check this one clip. Drag it all the way out to there and bounce in place. Oh, there is a little tail on that. And it doesn't look like I have any volume automation chopping it off there. So, hey, learn something new every day. I know I want to chop right here. That's a hard stop for the vocals that are going on. Let's check this one and see if there's any kind of tail on that. Nope, no tail on that. So the rest of these clips, I can just, select them and bounce them where they are in place. And this one, I'll just shorten it up and consolidate it with a, just like Ableton. A lot of the shortcut keys are the same, so consolidate is Control-J. So now that's one clean audio clip with no extra baggage in it. This one I may have to look up more closely during detailing and cut it short at this bar anyway. But for now, I'll leave the tail on it. So now we have, again, a hybrid track. The MIDI device is still there. So are all my other devices. And if we play any of these, you'll see that there's no MIDI being pushed through here anymore. So this one rack full of MIDI instruments is just being ignored. The automation on that track, though, this particular automation lane right here is jumping between the first device in the rack and its patch that I've named Blackout. Right at this point in the automation, it jumps to instrument number 3 here and turns it on and turns this one off, right? So as I play through these two clips, you're going to watch the automation still acting on this rack, but none of the synths inside the rack are receiving anything. So let's see what that sounds like. So watch right down here as it approaches bar
Don't need no
33.
whips, no. Don't need no chain, no. I make that sound that get into your brain.
Okay, see how it jumped? But it's still ignoring this. There's no yellow markers going through here. Oops, sorry, I did a shortcut to go to the beginning of the track. My bad.
Don't need no whips, no. Don't need no chain, no.
You'll see there's no yellow indicator showing MIDI being pushed through here. Okay, so now it's safe to get rid of this entire MIDI rack. Bye-bye. And yet, I've saved and preserved all of my other processing devices on the track, and this is something Ableton can't do. And this is one of the things I love about Bitwig, is it's like I try to limit how much effects processing I do and automation sweeps and toggles and ramps and cutouts. I try to limit how much of that I do early in the project, but sometimes to get a feel for how things are flowing and moving and whether your basic arrangement is solid or not, you need to do some automation. And so in Ableton, this is an important point. In Ableton, those of us who tend to flatten to audio at some point, we like to do our early processing on group tracks instead of on the individual tracks, because that way you can flatten an individual track and not lose all of this high level like volume automation and other basic effects that you want to test out and work with early in your project lifespan. So in Ableton, I would have been kind of forced to take a bunch of tracks or even a single track and group it just so I could put automation of processing on the group, so that when I flattened the MIDI track to audio, I wouldn't lose all of that processing and automation, because it would still be in the parent group. And then, after I flattened everything to audio, I could then copy and paste all of those different devices from its parent group down into the real audio track. And it's kind of it's something you do without thinking about too much if you're in Ableton, but it slows you down. It's a lot of extra steps. It's a lot of like keeping track of what's what and where is the processing for this track again. Is it on the track itself or is it on a group higher up? It just gets a little confusing. And so because Bitwig allows you to do this kind of freezing in place in a way, or bouncing in place in a way that preserves everything that isn't the MIDI instrument on that track, it just saves you a lot of time, and you don't have to play the game with grouping things just to put automation or effects up on the group. So this is one of the things I really like about Bitwig. Let's keep going. What's in this subtrack? This is just a sampler with a nice Moog sub 37 multi-sample in it. So I can flatten this out. There's no other processing I care about. Again, I'll just do it the simple way and bounce everything in place so that I can keep all my clip colors, because they're all slightly different MIDI patterns going on here. So let's just multi-select all these and right-click and do bounce in place. And now again, I can play any one of these. And you'll see there's no MIDI indicators. So everything's done there. Let's go ahead and delete the sampler, and that track's done. Now this mid-bass track, I'm not going to flatten this one because this is the heart of my drop. These are like these three tracks here are my drop sounds, especially this layer with these layers. And right now, I'm going to do a lot of chopping and gapping and interjections like this. Whatever's right here up in this sample, you know, I'm probably going to do something like, you know, deactivate it or chop it out entirely so that it's interjecting between this sound and this sound. In fact, let's hear it real quick. Okay, right? That sounds much cleaner than having both of them ringing out at the same time like this. Right? So that's just a shortcut. During early arranging, I don't worry about stuff like that. It's when I get into the detailing phase that I start cleaning up stuff like this once it's in audio. So the thing that's going to happen here, and let me undo some of that so I can make those decisions later. The thing about this mid-bass track is I've got a few different mid-basses, and I like all of them. I just used one of them for my early arrangement, like as a placeholder. So I'm going to still want to experiment with these other patches I tested out earlier and make some more changes to them. And just briefly, let's let you hear what they sound like and why I want to keep them. So here's the original that I used in the arrangement. And then here's another one. Here's another one. Okay, so they're all pretty good. I'm probably going to want to use all of them. So I don't want to flatten this particular track to audio just yet, because I'm going to do a lot more experimentation and detailing centered around this. I may even add more sounds before I'm done. Eventually I'll flatten them to audio, but not now. And since I'm only leaving 3 synthesizers in the entire project, the project will still load really super fast compared to how it loads now, because I have about 30 different synthesizers in this project right now. Okay, so we're going to ignore this track and move on to the next one. This is already audio, this big one. I was trying out a lot of different possible drum kits and drum patterns, and finally decided on 2 of them. So most of these I don't care about, and I'm happy to lose them. So let's just get this flattened out. Multi-select all these. Bounce in place. And there's no other processing going on here. And I think there isn't much in the way of automation. Yeah, the only automation that was going on is selecting between the different drum kits that I had at different points in the song. Oh, this is interesting. I did not notice this before. It is reverting some of my clip color changes, and it's making them all the same color as the parent color on the track. That's interesting. That's kind of a bummer. So I may have to rethink whether I want to do bouncing in place or just bouncing and then copying my colors. I'll pay attention to that on the next track. That's interesting. Even I'm learning something today. So we'll live with this for now. So I've converted all this to audio. It's safe to just get rid of the whole set of MIDI instruments entirely. And the automation lane automatically goes bye-bye too, since it's not needed anymore. And so let's find a place where it jumps from one pattern to another. So that's how that works. Yeah, I'm kind of scratching my chin and thinking here a little bit. I don't think there's a tail here I care about, but you know what? Let's redo this anyway and see how it's having to reload up in the upper right. It's reloading all the plugins that were these original drum tracks while it does its reverting. This is what makes projects take so long to load, is it's all the VSTs being loaded in memory. And then that was bringing back the move where I deleted the instrument. Let me go back one more time and convert those back to MIDI. So since I want to be able to preserve these colors, this time I'll do it a different way. And I'm also going to test just this one and make sure that there's no tail ringing out into this space that I care about keeping. So what I'm going to do here is a regular bounce to just create a new audio track, just to see if there's a tail. And see, with the bounces, it always picks some default random color and makes the new clips that color. So that's a little bit of a pain. Okay, there's nothing there I care about keeping. There's no tail. So I can get rid of this track entirely. And if there were processing effects or our volume automation happening on the original drum track, I would not choose to bounce to a new track and then color the clips. In this case, I'm just going to remember the color that I used for these. And I'll fix that when I do the bounce in place again. So sorry for making you sit through that. Let's bounce in place one more time. And you can see while it's doing it, it's actually playing the MIDI. It's actually creating audio. It's doing the automation jumps between the different channels inside of the instrument selector. Although I find this interesting, this looks like a bug to me. It's playing cyber abstraction right now, but it's still showing audio coming through absolute chaos instead. So that's a little bug in their display logic. It is the different drum pattern, but it was acting like it was only coming out this one channel. Okay, so let's just quickly recolor these. Can remember what's what. Okay, and then finally, let's go ahead and delete the original VSTs. Let's continue onward. So this track definitely has some automation I want to keep, so I'll flatten everything in place. So I've got a green color, a blue color. All right. Here, again, we'll just multi-select. Bounce in place. And again, I know for a fact that I want a lot of these to chop their tails short, especially this one right here. So I'm not going to bother going in and seeing if there was any kind of tail ringing out these effects definitely want to be chopped short. So I'm good with that. Let's recolor these real quick. All right. Now these effects. I know I want that one, the tail cut short, because that's a gap before kind of the pre-drop buildup. This one here, let's double check what the automation is on this. All right, I've got a volume drop there. This one I might want to ring out. These ones I might want to ring out. So let's test some of these real quick. And here's the bounce down here of the automation. That doesn't look right. Try it one more time. Playing the MIDI. Let's see what's going on here. One more time, bounce. There we go. So let's delete you again. Let's bounce some time out here. Ah, that's why my selection wasn't picking up the very start of the MIDI note. So, because I have an offset just a little bit. So let's do something like this. Bounce it. Nope, there's no tail on that one. So let's also double check this one. Okay, there's a tiny bit of a tail on this one. So with that in mind, I think I'll bounce this in place like so. Let's do, this one's a hard stop. This one doesn't have a tail, but the rest of these do have slight tails. So let's just bounce them one at a time. And again, you can't do this in Ableton. I'm going to bounce these two in place. Ableton's kind of all or nothing. You freeze the whole track, you flatten the whole track, that's it. So it's this kind of granularity that I like about Bitwig. Zoom in here a little bit, and let's go ahead and select a section of time. Switch my cursor. Let's go all the way to there and bounce that in place. Now I may end up chopping that tail short later, but oops, didn't want to make you. I'm in pen mode. Let's see. Drag that a little shorter and consolidate. All right, let's just keep doing these others. This one. Tail went about that long. Oops, don't want that track. Now this one I do want a hard stop because I've got a drum turnaround here and there's not really anything happening here. So this one I'll just bounce as it is in place. And this one here I might want to ring out. So let's just go a couple 16th notes past the end and bounce in place. So it's this kind of granularity. That's a really nice strength of Bitwig. Okay, so I've got that one bounced. I can now get rid of the original instrument selector. And again, I've got volume automation. I'm only getting rid of this track here that has the instrument selector automation on it. So when I delete the MIDI rack, it also deletes the corresponding automation, and all that's left is my volume automation coming from this device. Let's see, looks like this is already audio. Oh, that was one of my test tracks. Let's delete that. Almost done, 3 to go. These end world sirens, I know I want this one cut short because I've got a turnaround gap right here. So let's just bounce that in place. This one here, I might want to ring out. So let's see what it does. I'm gonna go grab that much of time and bounce in place. Yeah, it's got a little bit of a tail, so I'm just gonna leave that alone and I'll cut it short later during detailing. And this one, of course, is the end of the song, so I'm fine with having this one cut short. So I'll bounce this in place. Okay, so I can now get rid of this entire rack. And you'll see that my volume automation is still in place. I've got some hard fades to negative infinity. I've also got a little bit of a positive bipolar bump to this particular one to make it sit a little louder in what's going on here. Let's see, the bass drop. Bass drop. I don't think that has a tail, but let's see. Let's just bounce that in place. There's no other automation of any sort on the track. Yeah, it's got a little bit of a tail. I may chop that short when I'm doing the final detailing, but for now we'll keep it. So let's make sure I'm on the right track. All right, here's the one I want to get rid of. And finally, the Gregorian chant stuff. So again, I can tell I want a hard stop here because this is the intro with a big gap, big half bar gap here. So we'll just bounce this in place. And then over here at the end of the song, I've also got a hard stop because it's the very end. So I'll bounce that one in place. And last thing I'll do is get rid of the synth itself, but keep the volume automation that's on that track. So that's all the MIDI that I want to flatten. Let's save this real quick and let's demonstrate. This project used to take a full 1.5 minutes to load. But now if I load the detail V1, let's see how long it takes. So it looks like about 20 seconds, somewhere around like that. So a lot shorter now. There's still some plugins that I'm using for automation and effects that are on some of these tracks. Like, again, this mid-bass track has some Ubic FX racks on it, and it's still got the original VSTs, but it's a lot faster to load now. Most of the things that I want to commit to audio have been committed to audio, and of course the balance of everything is still the same. So let's start about here.
My name is Baphometrix. My name is Baphometrix. I bring you the message. What you say to that? Yeah, you say yes, mistress. Don't need no whips. No. Don't need no chain. No. I make that sound.
And there you go. So thanks for hanging out with me and learning about how Bitwig does bouncing. Hopefully you can see that it offers some unique advantages over Ableton. Speaking for myself, I've done about 4 projects in Bitwig now, full-time, and I do not miss the freezing feature at all. I really thought I would. I thought it was a pain in the butt to do bouncing and then deactivating tracks to kind of achieve the same thing as a freeze, but I actually find I don't do that. I usually do what you just watched me walk through here, and I feel it's a lot more specific and granular and flexible, and I can carefully like keep what I want to keep and get rid of what I want to get rid of, whereas Ableton's more like a blunt sledgehammer when it comes to all this freezing and flattening. It's sort of all or nothing. You have to be really sure you want to commit. And of course, I'll show you one last thing. Bitwig also has the ability to have multiple projects open at the same time. So I could, if I wanted to go back and grab any of these MIDI tracks, I just find my project that still has the MIDI name in it. And it's literally loading it up right here in a new tab. My old project is right here. The audio engine is still turned on. I can even play this while the other project is loading.
My name is Baphometrix. I bring you the message.
Okay, and meanwhile, over in this other tab, it loaded up all those devices and VSTs and stuff, and you can see I still have my MIDI. Like, let's say I want to grab this sub MIDI and make a change to it. I can literally grab this track, drag it up to the top, over to the other tab, back down into my project and put it right below this one, and look at that. Now I've got my original MIDI again. Fast, simple, flexible. It's like one of the many little things about Bitwig that just make Bitwig so much faster on your workflow. Once you get used to this and you start working this way, so much faster and more flexible than Bitwig in all these tiny little ways that add up once you look at all the many tiny little ways Bitwig is super fast. So thanks for hanging out with me, and let me save this before I forget, and we're good to go. Have a good day.